The coat showed up on a Tuesday, the way most things that change your life do quietly, without announcement, folded on top of a donation box outside the thrift shop on Clover Street like someone had left it in a hurry and didn't plan on coming back. Nora Callahan almost walked past it. She almost always walked past things. That was what 8 years of learning not to want had done to her. It had turned her into someone who kept her eyes low and her expectations lower, who had learned to measure the world not by what it offered, but by what it could be survived. At 26, she had already survived more than most people twice her age. She knew how to sleep sitting up in bus stations. She knew which church basements served soup on Wednesdays and which ones asked too many questions. She knew the smell of mold in a room before the landlord admitted the ceiling was leaking, and she knew the exact weight of a paper bag with 3 days' worth of food in it. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. She knew, above all else, how to keep walking. But something about the coat stopped her. It was long, navy wool, the kind that reached past the knee and had wide lapels and square brass buttons that had gone slightly green at the edges. Old. Expensive once, clearly. The stitching along the collar was done by hand. She could tell that even from 3 feet away, tiny even stitches that no machine made. Someone had cared about this coat. Someone had worn it somewhere that mattered and then, for reasons she couldn't begin to guess, let it go. Nora looked around. The street was empty in the way that November streets in Malvern, Oregon are empty, gray and damp, everyone tucked inside somewhere warm. She picked up the coat, held it against herself. It was too big, the shoulders drooping past hers by a full 2 inches, the hem brushing her shins. But it was dry, and it was heavy, and the lining was intact, and tonight the weather app on the cracked phone she shared with her roommate said the temperature was dropping to 28 degrees. She put it on. The fit was wrong, but the warmth was immediate, like stepping into a room where someone had left the fire burning. She shoved her hands into the pockets and started walking again, head down, breath clouding in front of her. Her right hand hit something. Not nothing, not lint, not a forgotten receipt. Something hard and metal and deliberate. Something that had been placed there and stayed. She pulled it out. It was a key. Not a house key or a car key. Those she knew. This was older, much older, 3 inches long with a thick round bow and a long cylindrical shaft and a bit at the end that was cut in a complicated pattern she had never seen before. The metal was dark, almost black, but where the light caught it at an angle it had a deep reddish warmth, like bronze that had been oiled and handled and cared for over a long time. She turned it over in her palm. Nothing was engraved on it. No address, no number, no identifying mark of any kind. Just the key itself, heavy and strange and somehow insistent in the way that objects with history always are. Nora stood on the sidewalk for a moment, rain beginning to fall in the thin, persistent way it does in Oregon in November, and she looked at the key. Then she looked up at the empty street. Then she put the key back in her pocket and kept walking, because she had learned a long time ago that questions without answers were a luxury she couldn't afford. But the key stayed in her pocket, and something about the weight of it changed the way the evening felt. She had been living in Malvern for 4 months, which was longer than she'd lived anywhere in the past 3 years. Before Malvern there had been Portland, before that Eugene, before that a brief and disastrous stretch in Boise that she tried not to think about. She'd come to Malvern because her former coworker Danny had told her about a room above a laundromat on Minter Street going for $380 a month, no credit check required. And $380 was something Nora could almost manage if she worked the early shift at the diner and picked up the occasional weekend cleaning job at the motel off Route 9. Almost manage. That was the operative phrase. The diner paid her $11.40 an hour plus tips, and tips in Malvern were not what they would have been in a city. The motel job was cash, $60 for 4 hours on Saturday mornings, and the owner had a habit of finding things to dock from her pay that she didn't have the energy to argue about anymore. She sent half of everything she made to A.P.O. box in Salem, Oregon, care of her brother Marcus, who was 17 and living in a group home, and who she had promised, 3 years ago when she'd had to leave, that she would find a way to get him out. She hadn't found the way yet, but she was still looking. The room above the laundromat was exactly what $380 a month bought you. A bed, a window that stuck, a hot plate that worked on the left burner only, a bathroom shared with the tenant down the hall, who left his shaving kit on the edge of the sink and never moved it no matter how many times Nora moved it back. The walls were thin enough that she could hear the spin cycles from below all night. A low rhythmic drone that should have been annoying, but that she had come to find almost comforting in the way that any consistent sound can become when everything else in your life is unpredictable. She came home that night and hung the coat on the hook by the door and sat on the edge of the bed and took the key out of her pocket again. Under the bare bulb of the overhead light, it looked even stranger than it had on the street. The bit at the end was complicated, with multiple notches cut at different depths, the kind of precision you saw in antique skeleton keys or the keys to old safety deposit boxes, or, she had read once in a book she'd found at a library sale, the keys to rooms in old houses that were meant to stay locked. She set it on the nightstand and stared at it for a while. Then she got up, made herself a can of tomato soup on the working burner, ate it standing over the sink because she hadn't gotten around to buying a table yet, and went to bed. She dreamed about a door. It was set into a stone wall, dark wood with iron fittings, and it had a keyhole she recognized even in the dream, even in the strange half-logic of sleep. She stood in front of it with the key in her hand, and the whole dream was just her standing there, not turning the key, not doing anything at all, just standing in front of a door that was waiting. She woke up at 4:47 in the morning to the sound of a spin cycle starting below and lay in the dark for a long time with the key on the nightstand, catching what little light came through the stuck window from the street lamp outside. She picked it up. She put it back down. Then she got up and got ready for the early shift. The diner was called Hazel's, though nobody named Hazel had owned it in at least 30 years. It was the kind of place that had been exactly what it was for so long that it had stopped being anything else, for booths along the window, 8 stools at the counter, a pie case with 3 kinds of pie rotating through the week, coffee that was bad but reliable. Nora had worked there since August. She had learned the regulars by their orders before she learned their names. The man who always got the 2-egg breakfast with rye toast, no butter. The retired schoolteacher who had the oatmeal every morning and tipped exactly $1 regardless of the bill. The pair of older women who split a blueberry waffle on Fridays and talked for 2 hours and tipped well, which was the important thing. She was good at the job. She was good at most jobs that required keeping track of many things at once and never letting the surface show what was happening underneath. That had always been her skill. The ability to look fine when she wasn't. To be functional at the exact moment that falling apart would cost her something she couldn't afford to lose. Her manager, Phil, was not a bad person. He was a tired person, which sometimes looked similar from the outside. He scheduled fairly, didn't steal tips, looked the other way when Nora took an extra bread roll at the end of a shift. He had hired her without asking too many questions about the gap in her employment history, which she appreciated more than she could say. That morning she moved through the breakfast rush on autopilot, refilling coffee, calling orders back to the kitchen, making change, smiling at the people who smiled at her, and moving efficiently past the ones who didn't. In the pocket of her apron, the key pressed against her hip every time she turned. She had put it there without entirely deciding to. It had just ended up there, the way things do when they've decided they belong to you whether you've agreed yet or not. At 9:30, during the lull between breakfast and the early lunch crowd, she was wiping down the counter when one of the regulars came in. His name was Mr. Aldric. She had learned, Walter Aldric, 70-something, retired, came in every Tuesday and Thursday for coffee and a corn muffin. He was the kind of man who had clearly once been important in some way and had never entirely forgotten it. Upright posture, careful speech, clothes that were old but had been good once and were maintained with the same fidelity he clearly applied to everything. He sat at his usual stool, and she poured his coffee without being asked, and he thanked her the way he always did, with a small nod that managed to be both formal and genuine at the same time. She was about to move away when he said, "That's an interesting coat." Nora looked down. She had thrown the navy coat on over her uniform before leaving the apartment because the walk to the diner was 3 blocks, and she'd lost her regular jacket somewhere and hadn't replaced it yet. She'd forgotten she was wearing it. "Found it," she said. "Donated." On top of the box outside the Clover Street thrift store. Mr. Aldrich looked at the coat for a moment with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not recognition exactly. Something closer to the look people get when something almost rings a bell. "Good find," he said, and picked up his coffee. She thought the conversation was over. Then he said, without looking up from his mug. The brass buttons. Those are custom. You don't see stitching like that anymore either. Not around here. You know coats? She said. I know quality. He said it simply, not as a boast. That coat was made to last. Whoever owned it took care of it for a long time. Nora turned the thought over. Then why leave it? He looked at her then, something quiet in his eyes. Sometimes people have to let go of things before they're ready, he said. Doesn't mean the things stop mattering. She nodded and moved to take the order from the 2-egg breakfast man and didn't think too much more about the conversation until she was halfway through the afternoon cleaning and she put her hand in the coat pocket again and felt the key and thought about what Mr. Aldric had said. Someone had held on to this coat for a long time. Someone had put this key in its pocket and then, for reasons she couldn't know, left the whole thing on a box in the rain outside a thrift store in a town small enough that nothing stayed secret for long. She turned the key over in her fingers. That evening she sat on her bed with her cracked phone and tried to search for it. Old skeleton keys. Bronze. Antique keys. She found auction sites, collector forums, Pinterest boards full of keys photographed in artful arrangements. None of them matched hers exactly, but some came close. The style, the proportions, the weight she guessed from photographs. They were listed as Victorian era or Edwardian, the sort used for cabinet locks, iron lockboxes, rooms in old houses that were secured not with modern pin tumbler locks, but with lever mechanisms that required exactly this kind of complicated bit. She searched for another hour. Then she set the phone down and looked at the key on the nightstand. Somewhere in Halvern, or somewhere near it, there was a door that this key opened. She didn't know why that felt like the beginning of something. She only knew that it did. The thing about Nora Callahan's life was that the hard parts hadn't come all at once. They had arrived in a sequence, each one building on the last, which was actually worse, she had come to understand, than a single catastrophe. A single catastrophe you could point to. You could say, here is the before, and here is the after, and this line between them is where everything changed. What she had instead was a slow erosion, so gradual that there were years in her childhood where she hadn't known things were wrong because she'd had nothing to compare them to. Her mother had been sick for as long as Nora could remember. Not visibly sick, not the kind of sick that brings casseroles and get-well cards. The invisible kind, the kind that lived inside the mind and sometimes went quiet for long enough that you started to believe it was gone, and then came back, which was always worse than if it had stayed. Her mother loved her. She was certain of that in the way she was certain of very few other things. But love and stability are not the same thing, and she had learned early that you could have one without any of the other. Her father had left when she was 9. Not dramatically, not with fights and slammed doors, the way it happened in movies. He had simply been there one morning and not there the next, and her mother had not explained it and Nora had not asked because she was 9 years old and already very good at not asking about things that would make the people around her have to feel something they couldn't handle. She had raised Marcus more than her mother had, and she had known that was the situation from the time she was 12. She packed his lunches and signed his permission slips and made sure he got to school on the days when their mother was somewhere that wasn't there. She did this without resentment, mostly because it was necessary and because Marcus was the person she loved most in the world, and love, she had discovered, makes necessity feel like choice. When she was 17, their mother was hospitalized for the first time. The state got involved. A caseworker named Deborah, who was efficient and not unkind, but who also had 43 other cases and not much margin for nuance, arranged for Marcus to go into temporary foster care while Nora, being 17 and technically old enough to manage, stayed in the apartment. Temporary became 6 months. During those 6 months, Nora worked at a grocery store after school and another one on weekends and sent money to the people who were taking care of Marcus and visited him every Sunday in the house where he was staying with a family who were adequate in the way that not quite enough is adequate. Enough to survive on, not enough to call abundance. When she turned 18, she got a studio apartment. She brought Marcus to live with her when she could. Then their mother was released, then not well enough, then hospitalized again. A cycle that repeated enough times that it stopped surprising her and started just being the weather of their lives. By the time she was 22, the studio had become a series of rooms in a series of cities, each move prompted by something. A job ending, a landlord deciding to sell, money running out before the end of the month in a way that left her one miscalculation from having nowhere to go. She had come close to nowhere 3 times. Each time she had found a floor, a couch, a church basement, a situation that was temporary and uncomfortable, and that she had turned into something survivable through sheer insistence on not giving up. Marcus was in the group home now because the group home was stable, which was more than she could offer him currently, and because the people there were professional and consistent in a way that mattered at 17. But she called him every Sunday, and she told him the same thing she always told him, that she was working on it, that she was getting there, that one day they would have a place of their own, and it would be real, and it would be theirs, and nobody would be able to take it away. She had believed that every time she said it. Sometimes she still did. The key stayed in her coat pocket. She wore the coat every day because November in Halvern was cold, and because she didn't have another one, and because there was something about it that she couldn't quite explain, a solidity, a presence, like wearing something that had been made for a different life and was waiting to see what she would do with it. She started asking questions. Carefully, the way she did everything, without exposing too much of what she was actually looking for. She asked at the library, where the town's historical records were kept in a back room, that the librarian, a woman named Helen with reading glasses on a beaded chain, was happy to let her use on slow afternoons. She asked at the hardware store, where an older man behind the counter took one look at the key and said it was old enough to predate most of the town's current buildings, which narrowed things down some. She asked at the Historical Society, which operated out of a converted Victorian on Pine Street, and was staffed by volunteers who were retired and very enthusiastic about the topic of old buildings. A woman there named Agnes, who was 78 and had lived in Halvern her entire life, turned the key over in both hands with the reverence of someone who understood objects. Lever mechanism, Agnes said. Pre-1920, most likely. Bronze, not iron, which means whoever made this had money or was buying for someone who did. She turned it over again. The bit pattern is unusual. Most period keys were simpler. This is a custom cut. What would a custom cut mean? Nora asked. Security, Agnes said. Custom cut meant one key, one lock. You couldn't just get a duplicate made at the hardware store. This opens something specific and only something specific. She handed it back. If you find the lock, you'll know immediately. The fit will be exact. What kind of lock uses something like this? Document safe, possibly. Iron lock box. Built-in cabinet lock. Agnes thought for a moment. In older homes, sometimes the master bedroom had a separate lock, separate from the door. A lockbox built into the wall, essentially. Fireproof, or meant to be. She looked at Nora with sharp, curious eyes. Where did you get it? Found it, Nora said again. Agnes studied her for a moment. Well, she said, if you want to find the door it opens, you'd want to look at the older properties. Anything built before 1930. Halvern has a few. She paused, then, there's the Whitmore place, of course. Though nobody's set foot in there in years. The name landed somewhere in Nora's chest. The Whitmore place, she repeated. She looked it up that night, lying on her bed with the cracked phone, the key on the nightstand, the laundromat drumming below. The Whitmore estate was 12 miles outside Halvern, up a county road that dead-ended at the property gate. The main house had been built in 1887 by a man named Edmund Whitmore, who had made money in timber and more money in land and had, according to the Historical Society's digital archive, built the house as a wedding present for his wife, a woman named Clara, who had grown up in England and wanted something that felt, the archive noted, like permanence. Edmund Whitmore died in 1931. Clara survived him by 9 years and left the property to their only daughter, Marguerite, who had married a man named Aldric. Nora's hand went still on the phone. Aldric. She read the name again. Marguerite Whitmore had married a man named Philip Aldric. Their son, the archive noted in a brief genealogical entry, was Walter Aldric. Walter Aldric, who came into the diner every Tuesday and Thursday. Walter Aldric, who had looked at the brass buttons on her coat and said someone had taken care of it for a long time. She sat up in bed and read the entry again. The Whitmore estate had passed to Marguerite and then to her heirs upon her death in 1978. The property had been listed in property records as belonging to the Aldric family trust since then, though it had not been inhabited or maintained in any active capacity for at least 20 years. She put the phone down. She picked the key up off the nightstand and held it in the dark for a long time. Mr. Aldric had looked at this coat. He had recognized the stitching, the the buttons, the quality. He had said someone had taken care of it for a long time and then let it go. She thought. He recognized it. She thought. He chose not to say so. She thought. Why? The next morning was Thursday. She got to the diner at 6. The early rush came and went. By 8:30, she was refilling the pie case with the Wednesday rotation. At 9:15, the bell above the door rang and Mr. Aldric came in. He sat at his stool. She poured his coffee. He thanked her with a small nod. She waited until he had had 2 sips. Then she took the key out of her apron pocket and set it on the counter in front of him. He looked at it for a long time. The kind of long time that tells you everything. You know what it is, she said. Not a question. His hands wrapped around the coffee mug. He was quiet long enough that she started to think he wasn't going to answer. Then, it belonged to my mother. The diner had 2 other customers in it. She moved her voice down. The coat, too. My mother's coat. He still wasn't looking at her. His eyes were somewhere else, somewhere farther back than the diner. She kept it in the closet of the main house for 40 years. Said she wore it the day she decided she was going to stop being afraid of anything. He paused. I boxed up some things last month. The coat ended up in a donation bag by mistake. I didn't realize until it was gone. The key was in the pocket. I know. Do you want it back? He finally looked at her. His eyes were the pale, clear blue of someone who has spent a lifetime being precise about things and was being precise now about what he felt. I haven't been back to that house in 11 years, he said. I don't intend to go back. Why? He was quiet again. Outside the window, a truck went past. The refrigerator behind the counter cycled on. Because there are things there I've been avoiding, he said. Things my mother tried to tell me about before she died that I wasn't ready to hear. I was 71 years old, and I still wasn't ready. He looked down at the key. She told me the house held something important. Something she had kept for a long time that she didn't want to die with her. He paused. She said the key would explain it. Nora waited. But going back to that house means going back to everything that went wrong in it, he said, his voice very quiet. Means going back to the years when my father was sick and my mother held everything together alone, and the years after he died when she held it together even more alone, and the year she died when I wasn't there the way I should have been. He shook his head. I'm old enough to know that I've been a coward about it. I just haven't been ready to stop. Nora looked at the key on the counter between them. Then she looked at him. I'll go, she said. He blinked. I'll go to the house. If you'll tell me where it is and give me permission to be on the property. She met his eyes. I found the coat. I found the key. Maybe I'm supposed to find the rest of it. He studied her for a long moment. Then he said, Why would you do that? She thought about it honestly. Because I've spent most of my life in places other people gave up on, she said. Because I know what it feels like to have something important left behind somewhere no one is looking. She picked up the key and held it out to him. And because your mother kept this in her pocket for a reason, and if she wanted someone to find the door, I think she would have wanted it to be someone who understood why locked things matter. Walter Aldrich looked at the key in her palm for a long time. Then, slowly, he reached out and pushed her hand back toward her. Keep it, he said. The address is 4417, County Road 18. The gate code is 1978, the year my mother died. He picked up his coffee mug. Tell me what you find, he said. She went on a Saturday, because Saturday was the one day she had open daylight and no obligation pulling at either end of it. She borrowed Danny's car, a 2009 Civic with a heat knob that only worked if you held it to the right, and drove the 12 miles east of town with the key in her coat pocket and directions pulled up on the cracked phone. The county road narrowed as it went, the trees thickening on both sides, November bare and gray against a low white sky. The pavement became pitted, then gravel, then 2 tracks of packed dirt through long grass. She almost missed the gate because it had been swallowed almost entirely by the overgrowth on either side, iron posts barely visible through the wild blackberry and volunteer cedar that had been reclaiming the edges of the property for years. She got out and punched 1978 into a keypad that was, remarkably, still functioning, and the gate, old iron, swung inward with the groan of something that had been asked to do this far less often than it was built for. She got back in the car and drove through. The driveway was a quarter-mile long. She drove it slowly, the trees leaning overhead, the grass in the center strip brushing the undercarriage. And then the trees opened, and the house was there. It was enormous. She had known it was big from the historical archive, but knowing and seeing were different things. 3 stories of dark stone with a wraparound porch and tall, narrow windows and a widow's walk along the roof that she could see was missing several of its balusters. A round tower at the left end of the main face. 2 chimneys, both intact. Ivy covering most of the east wall, dormant now, its bare stems a kind of map drawn on the stone. It was not beautiful the way a kept house is beautiful. It was beautiful the way something that has survived is beautiful, by virtue of still being there, by virtue of everything it had kept standing against. She sat in the car for a moment and looked at it. Then she got out. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. The porch steps held her weight, just barely. The front door was locked with a modern deadbolt that looked recently installed, which made sense. Even abandoned properties needed some protection. But the agent who managed the trust had given Walter a code for the lockbox beside the door when he'd texted to give permission for her visit. She opened the lockbox, retrieved the key inside, unlocked the deadbolt, and pushed the front door open. The air inside was cold and still and smelled like old wood and stone and something that wasn't quite dust, more like time itself, if time had a smell. The foyer was large, with a black and white tile floor and a staircase that curved upward against the left wall, and a hallway leading straight back toward what she could see. In the pale light from the open door was a kitchen. Nora stood very still and let her eyes adjust. Everything was there. That was the first thing she understood. No one had stripped the house. The furniture was under sheets, but it was all still present. A tall clock stood against the right wall of the foyer, stopped. Framed portraits hung above the wainscoting, half hidden in shadow. A table with curved legs sat against the left wall beneath the stair. She moved through the rooms slowly. The parlor, the dining room, the library. All of it under sheets, all of it intact, all of it perfectly quiet in the way that places are quiet when they've been listening for a long time without anyone to listen to. The library stopped her. It was at the back of the main floor, off the hallway, and it ran the full width of the house on that side. Tall shelves floor to ceiling on 3 walls with a rolling ladder still on its brass rail. The 4th wall was dominated by a stone fireplace with a deep mantelpiece and a painting above it, a landscape, mountains, and a lake at evening. More sheets, more furniture beneath them. But the books were uncovered, hundreds of them, spines dimmed with years of undisturbed dust. She walked the length of the room, trailing one finger along the shelves without touching the books. There was something about a library that made her feel more herself than almost any other room. She had grown up in libraries the way other people grew up in backyards, finding in them something that was consistent when nothing else was. She stopped at the fireplace. The mantelpiece was deep, maybe 18 inches, carved from what looked like black walnut. On it sat 2 candlesticks, tarnished silver. A small ceramic figure of a horse with a chip from one ear. A clock face without hands. And set into the stone below the mantelpiece, almost flush with the wall, so that you would only see it if you were looking, was an iron plate. About 6 inches square, dark with age, with a single keyhole in its center. The keyhole was the same shape as the key. Nora's hand was already in her pocket. She crouched in front of the plate and looked at the keyhole carefully. The lever mechanism Agnes had described. The precise fit of a custom cut. She brought the key out and held it up in the dim light from the library windows. Her hand was not shaking. She was not a person who shook when things mattered. She was the opposite, the kind of person who got very still. She slid the key into the lock. It went in smoothly, without resistance, the way the right key always does, like a sentence completing itself. She turned it. A click. Old, dense, unmistakable. The iron plate swung outward on a hidden hinge. Behind it was a cavity in the stone, roughly 12 inches wide and 8 inches tall and 8 inches deep. Stone walls inside, dustless because sealed. And inside, 2 items. The first was a leather document folder, dark brown, the stitching at its edges still intact, tied closed with a leather cord. It was old, but it had been protected in here, away from moisture and light and the general erosion of everything exposed. The second was a wooden box, perhaps 10 inches long and 6 inches wide, hinged at the back, with a small brass clasp at the front. Also old, also intact. Nora sat back on her heels and looked at both of them for a moment. Then she lifted them out, one at a time, and carried them to the sheet-covered table near the window where the light was best. She untied the leather cord first. The folder held papers, several of them, folded together. She opened the outermost one carefully, the paper dry and stiff but not crumbling. It was a letter, handwritten in ink that had faded to a soft brown. The handwriting was careful and educated, the kind of handwriting that was taught rather than developed, even, slanting slightly right, every letter complete. At the top, the date, March 14th, 1962. Below that, my dearest Walter. Nora stopped. She read those 2 words again. Then she looked at the date. Then she sat down on the edge of the shrouded chair beside the table because her legs had decided they needed a rest, and she didn't argue with them. Walter would have been 12 years old in 1962, maybe 13. His mother had written this letter when he was a boy and put it in this lockbox and left the key in her coat pocket and the coat in her closet, and apparently either lost it there or kept it for 40 years, and then somehow, by accident or by something less explicable than accident, that coat had ended up on top of a donation box outside a thrift store in the rain. Nora looked at the letter for a long moment. Then she read it. My dearest Walter, if you are reading this, then I am gone, or I am soon to be, and I have decided that I cannot leave without telling you what I should have told you when you were old enough to understand. I am sorry for the cowardice of paper when I should have found the courage for words. You know me well enough to know that honesty has never come easily to me except when I am alone with myself, and even then it takes a long time. Your grandmother, my mother Clara, was not born a Whitmore. She was born Clara Voss, in Hamburg, Germany, in 1869. She came to America at 18 with her family and very little else. Your great-grandfather Voss was a craftsman, a jeweler, and he brought his tools with him and 3 of his 4 children and the accumulated savings of a careful life. The 4th child, Clara's brother Ernst, could not travel with them and was to follow when arrangements could be made. He never came. Your great-grandfather Voss built a small business in Portland, and Clara grew up in it, learning the trade. And when she was 20, she met your grandfather Edmund at a fair, and he was charmed by her, and she was practical about him, and what she recognized in him was constancy, which was what she had never had enough of. They married in 1891, and he built her this house, and she brought to it her father's tools and her father's legacy and her own very considerable skill, which Edmund admired without entirely understanding. Your grandmother Clara was a jeweler, Walter, not in a modest way. She had a gift that she had inherited from her father and refined through years of practice that your grandfather recognized as extraordinary and that the rest of the world recognized only once, very briefly, in 1922, when she submitted 3 pieces to a juried exhibition in Portland under the name C. Voss, because she understood that the name Clara would have been a disadvantage, and won the first prize in all 3 categories she entered. She did not submit again. She did not seek recognition. She worked in the room at the back of the top floor of this house, the one with the north light she always preferred, and she made things that almost nobody ever saw because she made them for herself, and for the pleasure of making them, and because it was the truest thing she knew how to do. When she died in 1940, she left me 2 letters and a door. One letter told me where the door was. You will have found it yourself by now, if you are reading this. The other letter told me what was inside. I was not brave enough to open it for a long time. When I finally did, I found things I did not know how to account for, did not know how to value, did not know how to do right by. I was a woman alone in 1940 with a child to raise and a house I could barely keep and no one to advise me and no framework for understanding what I was looking at. I closed the door again. I told myself I would deal with it when the time was right. The time was never right. Walter, the box contains a portion of what your grandmother made over 50 years in that back room. Not all of it. Most of what she made she gave away or lost or had taken during the years that were difficult in ways I never fully explained to you. But what remains is what she considered her best work, and I want you to understand something about it before you open that box. It is not a collection. It is a record of a life. Every piece is dated. Every piece is signed on the back with her mark, the small double V she used because she was Clara Voss before she was anything else. She made these things because she needed to make them, because craft was the language she spoke most fluently, because in all the years of being transplanted and accommodated and made to fit into shapes that weren't originally hers, the work was the one place where she was entirely herself. I don't know what they are worth in the way the world means when it asks that question. I have never had them appraised. I have not had the courage for that either. But I know what they meant to her. And I know what I want them to mean for you. Sell them if you need to. I am not sentimental about objects, or I try not to be. But know what you are selling when you do. Know that each one of those pieces is a conversation between your grandmother and herself, the most honest conversation she was capable of having. Know that you come from someone extraordinary. I should have told you that while I was alive to tell you. With all my love, your mother, Marguerite. Nora set the letter down on the shrouded table. Outside the library windows, the November sky was the same pale white it had been when she arrived. Nothing had changed. The trees were still bare, the house was still cold, the dust was still settled on everything that had been here for decades. She sat with the letter for a moment. Then she reached for the wooden box. The brass clasp opened with a small resistance, the kind that comes from years of disuse rather than damage. She lifted the lid. The velvet lining inside was midnight blue, faded in places but intact. And arranged on it, separated by small velvet dividers, were pieces of jewelry. 9 of them. She did not touch them. She looked at them in the pale window light and tried to count what she was seeing. A brooch, 2 rings, a bracelet with a complex clasp, a pendant on a chain that was not the original chain, clearly, because the chain was newer than everything else. A pair of earrings with the wire posts of an early period. A decorative comb with what appeared to be stones set along its spine. A small pin in the shape of a bird. The stones, where there were stones, were deep and clear even through the coating of time. Green, red, one that caught the pale light and threw it back in a way that could only mean one thing. The work was extraordinary. She could see that without knowing anything about jewelry, without knowing any of the technical language for what made it so. The proportions were perfect. The detail was the kind of detail that requires not just skill but a particular quality of attention, the kind that only comes from someone who has made peace with the time the work demands. Every piece looked like it had been made by someone who was not trying to impress anyone, who was making it for the reason Marguerite's letter had described, because it was the truest thing she knew how to do. Nora closed the box carefully. She folded Marguerite's letter and put it back in the folder with the other papers, which she had not yet read. She would read them later, all of them. But first, she sat in the cold library of a house that had been waiting 11 years for someone to come back to it, and thought about a woman named Clara Voss who had crossed an ocean and built a life that nobody had fully seen and left behind 9 pieces of the truest thing she knew. And she thought about Walter Aldric sitting at the counter at Hazel's diner with his coffee, 70-something years old, not ready to come back. She took out her phone. He answered on the second ring. "It's Nora," she said. A pause. "Did you find something?" "Yes," she said. "You need to come." The silence on the line stretched out long enough that she thought he might say no, that he might say he wasn't ready, the same thing he'd been saying for 11 years while his mother's letter waited in the stone wall of the library. Then he said, "When?" "Now," Nora said. "If you can." Another silence. "Give me an hour," he said. He arrived in a dark green sedan that moved slowly up the driveway the way a person moves when they are preparing themselves for something they have put off too long. Nora watched from the porch, the coat pulled close around her shoulders. When he got out of the car, he stood for a moment with his hand on the door and looked at the house the way someone looks at a person they have not seen in years and are not sure will recognize them. She went down the porch steps and met him at the bottom. He was not a demonstrative man. She had understood that from 4 months of Tuesday and Thursday coffee. But his face when he looked at the house was not the face he wore at the diner counter. It was older and more open, the careful control of his usual expression temporarily replaced by something rawer. 11 years, he said. It was not quite addressed to her. "It's still standing," she said. He looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, some small recognition. "I suppose it is," he said. She took him inside. She showed him the foyer, the parlor, the dining room, not as a tour, but as a path, moving through the rooms at a pace that let him absorb them rather than be overwhelmed by them. He ran his hand along the banister post at the foot of the stair. He stood for a moment in the doorway of the dining room, looking at the shape of the table under its sheet. He did not speak. When they reached the library, she stood back and let him enter first. He moved to the window and stood there for a moment with his back to the room. Then he turned and looked at the shelves. His eyes moved across them, and she could see him reading titles he knew, recognizing spines. "She used to read to me in here," he said. Every night. Until I was old enough to be embarrassed about it. A pause. I wish I had let her keep doing it longer. Nora waited. Then she brought him to the fireplace. The iron plate was still open, the cavity empty now, the box and the folder on the table by the window where she had left them. She showed him the letter first, set it in his hands, and stepped back. He read it. She watched him read it the way she had read it, the careful stillness that comes when words are landing somewhere real. At a certain point, his hand rose and touched his mouth briefly, a contained gesture that suggested more underneath than it showed. He finished reading. He held the letter. Then he looked at the wooden box. She brought it to him without being asked. He opened it. She watched his face when he saw the pieces inside. He was quiet for a long time, longer than she had been. He lifted the brooch out very carefully and held it in the pale window light, turning it slowly. The stones caught and threw back the light in a way that made Nora understand, even from where she stood, that whatever those stones were, they were not glass. She never showed me any of this, he said. His voice was very low. She left you a letter about it. She left me a letter. He set the brooch back with the same care with which he'd lifted it. 40 years. She carried the key in her coat pocket for 40 years. He shook his head slowly, and she never said a word. She said she wasn't brave enough. Neither was I. He looked up from the box. I knew she had secrets. I always knew. She was a woman who had survived things she didn't talk about. I respected it, or I told myself I respected it. Really, I just didn't want to press. He looked back at the jewelry. Now I'm holding evidence of an entire life I knew nothing about. Nora sat down in the chair across from where he stood. She was a jeweler, she said. A gifted one. One that the world didn't know about because she didn't let them. Because it wouldn't have been permitted, he said. Or because she understood that attribution was not the point. He picked up one of the rings, held it at arm's length, studied it. She was German, you know. She came over in 1887 as a young girl. My grandfather's people were suspicious of her family for years. I knew that much. I didn't know what she'd had to give up to be accepted here. Maybe this is what she kept instead. He looked at her. She couldn't keep her name on her work. Couldn't keep recognition. Couldn't make the world acknowledge what she could do. Nora paused. But she could keep making it. She could keep the work itself. Walter Aldric looked at the box of his grandmother's jewelry for a long time. Then he sat down in the chair on the other side of the table and put his hands flat on its surface, steadying himself. My mother wrote that I should have them appraised, he said. You should. I haven't wanted to know. He paused. Knowing would make it real in a way that I could no longer avoid. Nora understood that. She understood it in her own life. The long years of not wanting to open certain envelopes, not wanting to have certain conversations, not wanting to confirm what she already suspected, because confirmation made it solid in a way that hope, however fragile, did not. I think your grandmother wanted it to be real, she said. I think she put that letter in this box because she wanted someone to know. He was quiet. She wanted it to be you, Nora said. She wrote your name at the top. Walter Aldric closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, they were wet in the way of someone who does not often permit himself to cry. I should have come sooner, he said. You came now, she said. The November light through the library windows was beginning to angle. Not quite afternoon, not yet evening. The house was still cold, but something about it felt different than when she had arrived. Less abandoned. More like a place where things were still in the process of being understood. Walter Aldric picked up the folder with the other letters. May I read these here, he said, while there's still light. Of course, she said. She left him in the library with his grandmother's letters and his grandmother's jewelry, and the open fireplace cavity in the stone wall, and the 40-year wait that was finally, in this cold November afternoon in a house that had been waiting for him, coming to an end. She went and stood on the back porch of the Whitmore house and looked out at the property she had not yet seen from this angle. A long slope of dead grass going down toward the tree line, and beyond the trees, barely visible in the low light, the silver flash of water. A pond. Or a small lake, maybe. She stood there in the coat that had found her and breathed the cold, clean air and thought about doors. About how some of them stay locked for so long that the people who hold the keys forget what they were protecting. About how sometimes it takes a stranger to remind you that locked things were meant, eventually, to be opened. She put her hand in the pocket of the coat and felt the key there, warm from her body. Behind her, through the library window, she could see the yellow rectangle of Walter Aldric reading in the last of the afternoon light. She did not yet know what the jewelry was worth. She did not know what the letters held, the other letters she had not read. She did not know what the next months would bring or what Walter Aldric would decide to do with what he had inherited, in all the ways that word applied. But she knew she had found what the key opened. She knew it had been worth finding. She stood on the porch of the Whitmore house while the November light faded and held that knowledge close. The way you hold something rare when you're not yet sure you're allowed to believe in it. Walter Aldric read for a long time. Nora came back inside when the cold became something she could no longer reason with, stepping through the back door into the kitchen and finding a faucet that still had water, cold only, which surprised her. She ran it for a minute until it cleared and drank from her cupped hands and looked around at the kitchen, which was large and stone-floored and had a wood stove in the corner that she thought, very briefly and practically, about trying to light. She didn't. It wasn't her house to light fires in. She moved back through the hallway and stopped outside the library door. Through the gap, she could see Walter at the table, the folder open in front of him, a second letter unfolded across his hands. His head was bent over it. He was reading with the whole of himself, the way people read things that are speaking directly to them across a distance of years. She went back to the parlor and sat on one of the sheeted chairs and waited. The house did not feel empty the way it had when she first walked in. It felt occupied now, in the way houses do when they are being remembered by someone who knew them, like the rooms were paying attention. She thought about Marcus. She thought about him the way she always did when she found herself in a moment that felt important, a reflex she had developed so long ago she no longer noticed it, as automatic as breathing. She thought about him in the group home in Salem with his careful grades and his 4 foster placements and the Sunday phone calls where he always said he was fine and she always believed him partially and doubted him the rest. She thought about the promise she had made him 3 years ago standing outside the last courthouse where she had tried and failed to establish guardianship at 23 with no stable income and no fixed address. One day, she had told him, one day we'll have a place of our own. She was still working on what one day meant. After about 40 minutes, she heard the library chair scrape back. Then footsteps. Then Walter Aldric appeared in the parlor doorway. He looked different than he had looked at the diner that morning. Not older, though there was something in his face that had deepened. More like someone who had been carrying a weight for a very long time and had just been allowed to set it down, not without effort, not without grief, but with a relief that ran beneath both. He held the folder against his chest. There are 7 letters, he said. My mother wrote them over 30 years. The first is from 1962. The last is from 1991, a year before she died. She wrote them when things happened that she felt she should have said to me and couldn't. He stopped. She writes about my grandmother in all of them. About the things she found in this room after my grandmother died. About the jewelry and the tools and the notebooks. Notebooks, Nora said. There are apparently notebooks. My grandmother kept records. Every piece she made, the materials, the dates, the inspiration if there was one she could put into words. He looked toward the hallway, toward the stairs. My mother says they're in the workroom on the 3rd floor. The one with the north light. Nora stood up. He looked at her for a moment, and there was something in the look that she recognized, something like the look she got from people who had underestimated her and were recalibrating. You don't have to, he said. I know, she said, and moved past him into the hallway. The staircase held. The 2nd floor was a series of bedrooms, all sheeted, all inhabited by the particular silence of rooms that have been waiting. She did not stop on the 2nd floor. She found the 2nd staircase, narrower, at the far end of the hall, and went up. The 3rd floor was smaller, accessed through a door at the top of the narrow stair that opened onto a short corridor with 2 doors. One was a storage room. She could tell by the latch, nothing complex. The other had a proper handle and a keyhole that was the wrong size for the key in her pocket. The lock here a different type, a simple mortise mechanism, and this door was unlocked already, the latch giving when she pressed it. She pushed it open. The room was long and narrow with a bank of north-facing windows that ran nearly wall to wall along the far end. The light through them was flat and even and precise, exactly the kind of light a person would choose for work that required accurate color judgment. A work table ran beneath the windows, its surface worn and stained in ways that spoke of decades of use. Clamps and small vices were clamped to its edge. Above it, mounted to the wall, was a pegboard from which hung tools she recognized from her phone research, gravers, burnishers, files of different profiles, punches, tweezers, pliers with jaws ground to specific shapes. They were dusty, but they were still there. On shelves to the right of the windows sat rows of small glass jars, their contents faded and settled but present. Metal filings, abrasive powders, flux, materials she could only guess at. Beside them, in a section that had been kept separate from the consumables, a row of composition notebooks. She counted them. 12. She went to them and lifted the first one off the shelf. The cover was black with a white label on which a date had been written in the same handwriting as the letter she had read below. Not Marguerite's writing. Clara's, which was smaller and tighter and had the particular economy of someone who was accustomed to precision in small spaces. She opened it. The first entry was dated 1902. A description of a commission she had taken from someone identified only by initials, the materials used, the time spent, the problems encountered in the setting, and a small sketch in the margin, done in pencil with the quick, sure hand of someone who drew the way others took notes. She turned pages, entry after entry, each one technical and specific, and occasionally, at the end, a few lines that stepped outside the technical into something else. The sapphire took 4 days to set correctly. I would not hurry it. H asked why it mattered, since the piece was only for the drawer. I told him because it matters to the sapphire. He did not understand. I do not need him to. Nora set the notebook down carefully. Behind her, she heard the staircase, and then Walter appeared in the doorway of the workroom. He stood there looking at it, his hand on the door frame. She never let me in here, he said. The whole time I was growing up. She said it was her room, and she needed it to be only hers. Did you resent that? I was a child. I thought it was mysterious. He came in slowly, moving to the workbench, running his hand along its worn surface. I understand it now. You can love people completely and still need a place that belongs only to you. Nora thought about the room above the laundromat, the single window that stuck, the left burner, the way she had, even in a space that barely qualified as her own, arranged the few things she owned with a care that was disproportionate to their value because the arrangement was an act of claiming, of saying, "This small corner is mine." The notebooks, she said. He went to the shelf and stood in front of them. She watched him look at 12 notebooks worth of his grandmother's inner life, and she could see the understanding settle across him, slow and enormous, like weather moving in. She was working up here until 1939, he said. Marguerite's letter had told him that. 1 year before she died. 70 years old, Nora said. Still making things. He pulled one of the middle notebooks from the shelf and opened it with careful hands. He read for a moment, then turned the book so Nora could see. A sketch in the margin, quick and sure. A brooch with a central stone surrounded by a pattern that resolved, if you looked at it long enough, into a bird in flight rendered in the negative space between the metalwork. It was the brooch in the wooden box downstairs. She drew it before she made it, Nora said. She always worked that way, apparently. He turned more pages, more sketches, more notes, more of the voice that had been sealed in this room for 80 years. She left records of everything. Nora sat down on the stool at the far end of the workbench. Outside the north windows, the sky was fully overcast now, gray and close, but the light in the room was still clear. She understood why Clara had wanted this room. The light up here was honest. Nothing was prettified by it. You need to have the pieces appraised, she said. He was still reading. He turned another page. I know. Not because the money matters more than what they are, she said, but because knowing what they're worth is part of knowing what your grandmother was. He looked up from the notebook at that. She was extraordinary, Nora said. You already know that. But the world measured things in certain ways. And if those pieces are worth what I think they might be worth based on nothing but what they looked like and how they were made, then the world owed her a recognition it never paid. And finding out the number is one way of giving it to her posthumously. Walter Aldric held the notebook and looked at Nora Callahan sitting on his grandmother's stool in his grandmother's workroom and said nothing for a moment. Then, how old are you? 26. You speak like someone much older. I've had a lot of time to think, she said. I don't own much else. He looked back at the notebook. I know an appraiser in Portland, he said. Antique jewelry. He's been in practice for 40 years and he's reputable, which in that business is not a given. He paused. I'll call him Monday. Good. He closed the notebook and placed it back on the shelf with the same precision with which she had replaced the first one. Then he turned and looked at the room one more time, at the tools on the pegboard, the jars on the shelves, the worn surface of the workbench. She was happy here, he said. Not a question. I think she was herself here, Nora said. Which is the same thing, if you're lucky. He nodded once. Then he said, come downstairs. I'll make us coffee if there's anything in the kitchen worth making it with. And if there isn't, we'll do without. I want to show you the rest of the letters. There was no coffee. There was, remarkably, a box of tea in the back of a cabinet, sealed and apparently impervious to time, and Walter filled a kettle from the kitchen tap and set it on the gas range and found, after 3 tries, a burner that still lit. They sat at the kitchen table with tea the color of rust and the folder of letters between them and the wooden box beside it, and he told her what the letters contained. His mother had found the jewelry in 1940, the year of Clara's death. She had been 22, recently married to Walter's father. Philip just moved into the main house as the new mistress of the estate and entirely unprepared for what she found in the locked library compartment when a second letter from Clara, left with the estate attorney, told her where to look. The second letter, the one addressed to Marguerite, was in the folder too, unfolded now, the handwriting Clara's. Nora read it while Walter watched. My dear Marguerite, I have made things all my life. You have seen some of them and thought them pretty, but you have not known what they are, and I have not been able to tell you because the telling would have required an explanation I have not been able to give without a courage I have never quite assembled. What is in the box is the best of what I have made in 50 years. I cannot tell you what it is worth because I have never found out. I only know that the stones are genuine and the work is mine, and that in certain circles, if you found the right people, the right rooms, the right conversation, it would be understood immediately. I want you to know something about the stones, which will seem strange when I tell you. Most of them came with us from Hamburg. My father was not only a craftsman. He was careful with what he earned, and more careful still about what he carried when we left. The Germany we left in 1887 was not the same Germany it had been when he was young. He understood, with the instinct of a man who had survived difficult things, that what you keep in a bank can be seized. What you carry in your craft, in your skill, in the work of your hands, travels with you. He brought the stones in the lining of his tools case. Diamonds, emeralds, 2 large rubies, and several sapphires. All of them purchased quietly over 10 years from sources he trusted and kept without documentation, because documentation could be taken from you, but knowledge could not. When he died, he left them to me. Not because I was the oldest or the most businesslike, but because he said I was the only one who would understand what to do with them. He was right. I set them, one by one, over 50 years, into pieces I made myself. Every stone has a home now. Every stone is held in work that will last as long as the metal itself. I did not do this for money. I did this because my father trusted me with them, and I wanted to honor that trust in the way I knew how. But the pieces are yours now, and you may do with them what you need to do. If times are hard, sell them. There is no shame in it. They are meant to provide. That was, in the end, what my father understood about beautiful things. That their purpose is not to sit in boxes. Their purpose is to matter to people when people need them to. With all the love I have ever had for you. Your mother-in-law, Clara. Nora set the letter down. Outside the kitchen window, the afternoon had gone fully gray and the first drops of rain were beginning to hit the glass. The light in the kitchen was dim. Walter had found a candle somewhere and lit it, and it sat between them on the table, small and steady. Her father brought them from Germany, Nora said. In 1887. Walter wrapped his hands around his mug, hidden in his tool case. And Clara spent the next 50 years setting them into jewelry she kept in a box in a locked compartment in a library wall. She was protecting them the same way he did, Nora said. In the work. In the skill. In something that couldn't be seized or documented or taken. An immigrant's logic, he said, not unkindly. Hide your wealth in something that looks like a hobby. He was quiet for a moment. I wonder if she was frightened during the war. If she thought about those stones differently then. Whether she ever came close to selling them. The notes might tell you, Nora said. The notebooks. He nodded slowly. The rain was coming harder now, the old house settling around it. Small sounds of water finding whatever gaps time had opened in the roof and walls. Nora thought about the drive back to Halvern. About the room above the laundromat and the hot plate and the Sunday call to Marcus and the week of early shifts ahead. She thought about the coat hanging on its hook by her door. She thought about the key, which was still in its pocket. She looked at the wooden box on the table. "May I look at them again?" she asked. He pushed the box toward her. She opened it and looked at the 9 pieces laid in the midnight blue velvet. In the candlelight, they were different from how they had been in the cold window light of the library. Warmer, more alive. The stones pulling the flame and doing something with it that had nothing to do with refraction and everything to do with the fact that a careful woman had chosen each one and placed it where it would do exactly this. The bird pin was the one she kept coming back to. It was small, maybe 1.5 inches long, the bird in mid-flight with its wings back and its beak angled forward. The body was gold. She was almost certain, the wings slightly textured to suggest feathers, and set in the breast, where the heart would be, was a diamond that even by candlelight was unmistakably real. Not large, not ostentatious. Just there, precise and clear, the exact right size for where it sat. She had never owned anything like it. She had never expected to. She was not thinking about ownership now. She was thinking about the woman who had made it, standing at the bench in the room upstairs with its honest north light, setting that stone into that bird, deciding it was right. She was extraordinary, Nora said again, quietly. Yes, Walter said. She was. They sat with the candle and the rain and the 9 pieces of jewelry that had been waiting in the dark for 80 years, and neither of them spoke for a while. And the silence was not uncomfortable, but the opposite, the kind that only exists between people who are in the presence of something larger than conversation. Walter called her on Monday evening. She was at the diner, end of the late shift, wiping down the counter while Phil counted the register. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket, and she stepped into the back hallway to answer it. "I spoke with the appraiser," Walter said. His voice was careful in a way that made her set down the cloth she was holding. "His name is David Park. He's been appraising antique jewelry in Portland for 38 years. I described the pieces to him from memory and from the sketches in my grandmother's notebooks, which I brought home Saturday evening." "What did he say?" she said. A pause. "He wants to see them in person, obviously. He won't assign value without examination. But based on my descriptions, specifically the period, the craftsmanship, and my account of the stones," he said. Another pause, shorter. "He said he thought I should come as soon as possible." Nora leaned against the hallway wall. "What does that mean?" "He said the diamond alone in a piece of that period and quality could be significant. He said if the stones are what I described, if the cutting is period correct and the provenance can be established through the notebooks, then what we are talking about is not a modest family collection." His voice was very measured. He used the word substantial several times. How substantial? He wouldn't say without seeing them. But he said that handcrafted pieces from that era with documented provenance and high-quality stones in excellent condition are extremely rare. He said most of what survives from that period was either melted down during the wars or is in museum collections. Walter paused. He said 9 pieces of this description, intact, documented, and held privately, would be, in his words, a significant discovery. Nora was quiet for a moment. "He wants to see them Thursday," Walter said. "I'd like you to come with me, if you're available." She thought about Thursday. She had the morning shift, 7 to noon. Portland was 2 hours. If she asked Phil to let her leave at 11, Phil would say yes. Phil always said yes to reasonable requests, which was one of the things she had come to rely on about him. "I'll be there," she said. They drove to Portland on Thursday morning in Walter's dark green sedan, the wooden box in a padded bag on the back seat, the folder of letters beside it. Nora had her phone and a notebook she'd bought at the dollar store and the key in her coat pocket because she had stopped putting the key anywhere else. Walter drove and they talked, more easily than she would have expected 2 weeks ago, but something had shifted between them on Saturday in the house that made conversation different. They were not quite equals. He was 73 and she was 26, and he had grown up in a house with 12 rooms, and she had grown up in a series of places that other people owned. But they had been in the same cold library together and read the same letter and sat at the same kitchen table with the same candle. And that created a kind of lateral understanding that bypassed the usual distances. He asked her about Marcus. She told him the fuller version, not the edited one she gave to people she didn't trust yet. She told him about growing up with her mother's illness, about the packing of Marcus's lunches, about the foster care and the separated placement and the years of Sunday phone calls and the failed guardianship attempt and the O box in Salem. He listened without filling the silences, which was the right thing to do. When she finished, he said, "How old is he now?" 17. He turns 18 in March. What does he want to do? He wants to study engineering. He's good at math, better than I ever was. His group home has a decent school district, so his grades are solid. She looked out the window at the highway, the flat gray of Oregon in November. He just needs somewhere to land when he ages out. Somewhere real. When does that happen? June, she said. He graduates in May and the placement ends in June. 7 months. Walter said nothing for a moment. Then, "You've been carrying this for a long time." "It's not a burden," she said, and meant it. "He's my brother." "I know," he said. "That's not what I meant." She turned to look at him. "I meant you've been carrying it alone," he said. "For a long time. Without anyone carrying anything back." She didn't answer that. Not because it wasn't true, but because she had found, over the years, that acknowledging the weight of something made it heavier, and she needed it to stay manageable. She looked back out the window. After a moment, Walter said, "My mother carried things alone, too. For most of her life." He kept his eyes on the road. "I thought she was strong. I admired it. I didn't understand until I read those letters that she was lonely in it, that she would have liked, some of the time, for someone to carry something back." Nora said nothing. "I'm old enough to have failed that with her," he said quietly. "I'm not sure I'm old enough to stop making the same mistake." They drove the rest of the way to Portland mostly in silence, but it was not an empty silence. It was the kind that exists between people who have said something real and are letting it settle. David Park's office was on the 3rd floor of a building in the Pearl District that managed to be both old and well-maintained, the kind of building that had been worth taking care of. The waiting area had a thick carpet and cases of jewelry behind glass and an assistant who offered them water and didn't blink at Nora's coat. David Park himself was Korean-American, somewhere in his late 60s, with the compact, precise manner of someone who had spent his life looking at small things very carefully and had developed, as a result, a particular quality of attention that he applied to everything, including the 2 people who walked into his office carrying a padded bag. He shook their hands and gestured to the chairs across from his work table, which was lit from below and above and had a magnifying apparatus on a jointed arm off to one side. "Mr. Aldric," he said, "before we begin, I want to say that what you described on the phone was either very exciting or a common misunderstanding of period craftsmanship, and I have been doing this long enough to know that I cannot tell which from a phone call." He sat down and folded his hands on the table. "Let's see what you have." Walter opened the padded bag and lifted out the wooden box. He set it on the table and opened it. David Park looked at the 9 pieces for a moment without touching them. His face was professionally neutral, but Nora was watching his eyes, which were not neutral at all. Then he reached for the set of tools on his table, tweezers, loop, a small light, and picked up the brooch first. The room went quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when someone is concentrating on something that matters. David turned the brooch under the light, shifted the loop, adjusted the lamp angle. He set the brooch down and picked up one of the rings. Then the second ring. Then the bracelet. He worked through all 9 pieces, unhurried, thorough, making occasional notes in a leather-covered pad beside him. When he finished, he set down the last piece and sat back and looked at Walter. "The stones are genuine," he said. "All of them. The diamonds are old European cut, consistent with late 19th to early 20th century sourcing. I'll need to test for clarity and carat weight properly, but from initial examination, the large diamond in the brooch is not small, and the clarity appears excellent." He paused. "The emeralds are Colombian, I believe, which is significant from a value perspective. The rubies are Burmese, both of them, which is rarer still." Walter was very still. "The metalwork is exceptional," David continued. "Handmade throughout. No machine-made components at any point, which is consistent with your grandmother's era and with what you described of her practice. The settings are technically sophisticated, more sophisticated than most of what I see from this period outside of major workshop pieces." He picked up the bird pin again and held it under the light one more time. "This piece in particular. The bezel setting on the diamond is one of the finest examples of period hand setting I have seen in 30 years of practice." "You've been doing this for 38 years, Walter said. "Yes. I said 30 because I was being conservative." David set the pin down. "The documentation matters enormously here. You said your grandmother kept notebooks." 12 of them, Nora said. Entries for every piece she made from 1902 through 1939. Dates, materials, sketches. David looked at her for the first time since they'd sat down. You saw them? Saturday. On site. He turned back to Walter. If those notebooks can be authenticated, and I have colleagues who can do that, the provenance they establish transforms these pieces from exceptional private items into documented historical artifacts. That changes the market considerably. He looked at the box. The story of how these stones were transported from Germany, if it can be corroborated even partially through the notebooks and letters, adds a layer of historical significance that certain collectors and institutions value extremely highly. Walter said, "Can you give us a range? A preliminary estimate?" David was quiet for a moment. He looked at the box again. Then he said, "Preliminary, without the notebook authentication, based on what I have examined today." He paused. The 9 pieces together, conservatively, are worth between $40 and $60 million. With notebook authentication and provenance documentation, that number could increase significantly. Certain pieces, the brooch, the bird pin, the Burmese ruby ring, would attract serious collector attention individually. He looked at Walter directly. If you were to pursue a major auction house, Christie's or Sotheby's, with full provenance documentation, I would not be surprised to see the collection achieve significantly more than my conservative estimate. The room held the number for a moment. $40 to $60 million. Conservative. Nora looked at the wooden box, at the 9 pieces laid in midnight blue velvet, at the bird in flight with the diamond in its breast, and she thought about a woman standing at a workbench in the honest north light of a room she had kept only for herself, setting a stone into a wing, deciding it was right. She thought about what Walter had said on the drive down, about carrying things alone. She thought about Marcus. She put her hand in her coat pocket and wrapped her fingers around the key. They had lunch at a place near David Park's office, a quiet restaurant with warm light and food that cost more than Nora usually let herself spend, and that Walter paid for without discussion. They sat across from each other with the padded bag between their chairs, and neither of them said anything for a while. Then Walter said, "I owe you something." She looked up. "You found the coat," he said. "You found the key. You went to the house when I wouldn't. You sat in that library and read my mother's letter, and then you called me and told me to come." He set down his fork. "Without you, I would have gone on not knowing for however many years I have left, which is what I had been doing for 11 years, and what I had every intention of continuing to do. You would have found it eventually," she said. "No," he said. "I wouldn't have. The coat was in a donation bag by accident. The key would have gone into the box with the coat and ended up in the back of the thrift store." He shook his head. "Or more likely someone would have taken the coat and thrown the key away, not knowing what it was." She thought about that. About how close she had come to walking past the coat on the sidewalk. About the particular combination of circumstances that had resulted in her standing in front of a fireplace in a house she had never heard of with a key that fit a lock no one had opened in 40 years. "I found the coat because I needed a coat," she said. "It wasn't noble. I was cold." "Most important things happen for ordinary reasons," Walter said. He picked his fork back up. "That doesn't make them less important." She ate. The food was good. She tried to be present in it, in the warmth of the restaurant and the good food and the company of this careful, honest man who had spent 11 years not going home and was now, because of a coat and a key and a stranger, beginning to understand what he had been keeping himself from. When the plates were cleared, Walter said, "I want to talk to you about the house." She waited. "It's mine," he said. "Legally, unambiguously mine, through the family trust. I have been paying the maintenance costs for 11 years without ever setting foot in it, which is a kind of insanity I have only recently been able to admit." He looked at the table. "I want to go back. I want to open the house properly, have the roof inspected, have the heating assessed, make it livable." He paused. "I want to spend time in that library reading those letters. I want to sit in that workroom and read those notebooks." Another pause. "I'm 73 years old, and my grandmother left 12 notebooks full of herself in a room on the 3rd floor of a house I have been avoiding for 11 years. I want to read them before I run out of time." "You should," Nora said. "I will," he said. "But I also want to ask you something, and I want you to understand that you are free to say no, and it won't change anything between us." She waited. "The caretaker's cottage," he said. "It's on the east side of the property. separate from the main house, its own entrance from the road, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a wood stove that works. The previous caretaker couple left 3 years ago when they retired, and it's been empty since. He looked at her. I'd like to offer it to you. The restaurant noise continued around them. A waiter went past. Someone at another table laughed. Not as charity, he said. As a genuine arrangement. I need someone on the property while I'm there part-time. Someone who can be present when contractors come, who can manage the small daily things that a house like that requires. I would pay you for it, not much, but not nothing, and the cottage would be yours to live in at no cost. He paused. It would also have room for your brother, if his situation changes in June. Nora put her hand flat on the table and looked at it. I don't want you to think I'm making you an offer because I feel sorry for you, Walter said. I'm making you an offer because you are practical and honest and you clearly know how to manage difficult situations, and that is exactly what the Whitmore property needs for the next year while I figure out what to do with it. She looked up. Also, he said, more quietly, my mother would have liked you, and my grandmother would have given you that bird pin to wear and told you to stop apologizing for taking up space. He almost smiled. So there is a sentimental component as well. I won't pretend there isn't. Nora Callahan sat in a warm restaurant in Portland with the key in her pocket and a man across from her who was offering her a door she had not expected and thought about all the things she had learned about what it meant to keep important things locked away until the wrong moment. She thought about Clara Voss setting a diamond into a bird's breast in a room with honest north light and deciding it was right. She thought about Marcus in Salem with his engineering dreams and 7 months until he aged out. She thought about Sunday phone calls and one day and the weight of carrying things alone. Yes, she said. Walter nodded once, the small formal nod she knew from 4 months of Tuesday and Thursday coffee, and picked up his water glass. Good, he said. Then we'll start Monday. She told Phil that Friday. He took it better than she expected, which was to say that he looked genuinely pleased for her in the way of someone who had always known the diner was a stop and not a destination. He gave her 2 weeks' notice of her own to use or not use as she chose, which was more generous than it needed to be. She told Danny on Saturday, over coffee in Danny's apartment, which was warmer than hers and had a working oven that Danny used with cheerful frequency. Danny hugged her for a long time and said she always knew something was going to happen because Nora was the kind of person things happened to, which was not quite accurate, but was said with enough warmth that Nora accepted it. She packed on Saturday afternoon. It didn't take long. She had always packed quickly, which was one of the skills developed by a life in transit, the ability to reduce your belongings to what fits and what matters, and to let go of the distinction between the two without grief. She had 2 bags and a box, which was the same amount she had arrived with 4 months ago. She took the coat off the hook by the door and folded it over her arm. She called Marcus that Sunday, earlier than usual. He picked up on the first ring, which he never did, which meant he had been waiting. You sound different, he said immediately. I have something to tell you, she said. She told him about the coat, about the key, about the house and the letter and the jewelry and Walter Aldric and David Park and the number that had sat in the quiet room like a held breath. She told him about the cottage on the east side of the property, separate entrance, 2 bedrooms. He was quiet for a long time when she finished. 2 bedrooms, he said. 2 bedrooms. Another silence. Nora, I know. You've been working on this for 3 years. I've been working on it longer than that, she said. But yes. She could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. Heard the sound of the group home behind him, the television in the common room, the particular ambient noise of a place that was adequate but not home. Is it real? He said. This is all actually real? I'm standing in a room above a laundromat, and I'm moving to a cottage on a 200-year-old estate in 12 days, she said. So yes, as far as I can tell, it's real. He laughed, a real laugh, the kind she hadn't heard from him in months, sudden and unconstrained. She held the phone and let it happen and felt something loosen in her chest that had been wound tight for so long she had forgotten what it felt like before. I graduate in May, he said, when the laugh had settled. I know when you graduate. And then you come, she said. If you want to. If I want to. His voice cracked slightly on it, the crack of 17-year-olds trying to be steady. Nora, of course I want to. Then come, she said. We'll figure the rest out together. They talked for another hour, the longest Sunday call they had had in years. and by the time she hung up, the laundromat below had gone through 2 full cycles, and the light outside the stuck window had gone dark, and she was sitting on the edge of a bed she would sleep in for only 11 more nights with the coat across her lap and the key in her hand. She looked at the key. She thought about what Agnes at the Historical Society had said. If you find the lock, you'll know immediately. The fit will be exact. She had found the lock. The fit had been exact. She thought about Walter Aldric telling her that most important things happen for ordinary reasons. She had been cold and she had needed a coat, and someone had left one on top of a donation box, and it had had a key in its pocket, and the key had opened a door that had been waiting 40 years for exactly this. She put the key in the pocket of the coat and left it there, where it belonged. She lay back on the bed and looked at the ceiling and listened to the laundromat spin below and thought about all of it, the whole complicated chain of it. And in the thinking, she did not arrive at any grand conclusions because she was too practical for grand conclusions. She arrived, instead, at a smaller and more durable understanding. That sometimes the thing you need finds you in the form of something ordinary, a coat in the rain, a key in a pocket, a door that has been waiting. That the question is not whether you deserve it. Clara Voss had not asked whether she deserved to bring her father's stones across an ocean and set them into work that nobody would see for 80 years. Marguerite Aldric had not asked whether she deserved the truth her mother left her in a lockbox in the library wall. Walter had not asked whether he deserved a stranger to go ahead of him into the house he couldn't face. The question was simpler and harder than deserving. The question was what you did when the door opened. The day Nora moved to the Whitmore estate, it was not raining, which felt significant only because it had rained for the preceding 9 days without pause, which was normal for November in Oregon and which she had stopped noticing. But that morning the clouds broke and the sun came through, the pale, tentative sun of late autumn that gives everything sharp edges and long shadows. And she drove Danny's borrowed Civic for the last time up the county road and through the iron gate and down the quarter-mile driveway with her 2 bags and her box in the back seat. The caretaker's cottage was on the east side of the main house, connected by a gravel path that went around the back through a kitchen garden, gone to seed now, but with good bones. It was smaller than the main house. Obviously, white-painted wood with green shutters and a chimney that Walter had already confirmed was functional, and a porch facing east toward the tree line. James, the former caretaker, had come back for a week to help Walter assess the property. He had aired out the cottage, confirmed the wood stove worked, checked the plumbing. When Nora pulled up, he was stacking firewood by the porch, and he waved at her with the comfortable ease of someone who had been taking care of this place for long enough to feel proprietary about it. "Place is ready," he said. "Heat works, water's hot. I left some basics in the kitchen. And the view off the east porch in the morning is something you won't get tired of." Nora got out of the car and looked at the cottage. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a wood stove, a porch, hers. She carried her bags inside and set them down in the main room, which had a braided rug on the floor and a reading chair by the window and a fireplace across from it, small and practical. She stood there for a moment, just standing. Then she went into the larger of the 2 bedrooms, the one with the east window, and she set her box down on the floor beside the bed, and she opened it and took out the few things she owned that mattered. Her books, her photo of Marcus, the dollar store notebook, and she put them on. The windowsill in the arrangement that meant this space was claimed. This corner is mine. She went back out to the main room and hung the coat on the hook by the door. The key was in its pocket, where it would stay. She put the kettle on. Outside the east window, the property stretched away toward the trees, the dead grass silver in the morning light, the pond or small lake visible in the middle distance, catching the sun. A bird crossed the sky above the tree line, wings back, angled forward, in the posture of something that knows where it's going. She watched it go. Behind her, the kettle began to heat. December came in hard that year, the way it does in the mountains east of Halvern, not gradually but all at once, as if the season had been waiting just beyond the tree line and had simply decided, on a particular morning in the first week of the month, to stop waiting. Nora woke to frost on the east window and the wood stove still warm from the night before and the sound of a woodpecker somewhere in the trees beyond the pond, working at something with the particular focused persistence of a creature that has no interest in anything except the task directly in front of it. She had been at the cottage for 3 weeks. In those 3 weeks, she had learned the property the way she learned most things, methodically and on foot, walking the paths through the grounds in the early mornings before the light fully settled, mapping the distances between the main house and the pond and the tree line and the eastern fence. She had learned which porch boards were soft and needed watching, which door in the main house stuck in cold weather, and which one had warped beyond reliable use, where the water came in along the north wall when the rain was heavy enough. She had also begun to understand the rhythm of Walter's presence on the property, which was 3 or 4 days a week now, sometimes 5. He came in the morning, worked in the library or the workroom through the day, and left in the late afternoon to drive back to his apartment in Halvern. He was systematic about it, the way he was systematic about everything, working through Clara's notebooks in order, reading each one completely before moving to the next, making his own notes in a pad he kept on the work table beside the lamp he had brought from home because the workroom's overhead fixture was not adequate for the kind of reading he was doing. He did not talk much about what he was finding. Occasionally, he would come down to the kitchen at midday, and she would make them both tea, and he would say something brief and precise, a sentence or two that contained a great deal without elaborating on any of it. One day, she was funny. Her grandmother was funny in a way nobody knew about. Another day, she talks about the rubies the way you'd talk about children. She worried about them, whether they were placed correctly, whether they were happy. Nora had started, without quite deciding to, keeping her own notes in the dollar store notebook. Not about Clara or the jewelry, but about the property itself. The frost patterns on the east window. The way the pond reflected different things at different times of day. The woodpecker's schedule, which turned out to be consistent enough to set a clock by. Small observations, the kind she had always made in her head, but had not previously had reason to write down because nothing in her life before had felt stable enough to build a record of. She was building a record now. David Park called Walter on the 15th of December. Walter came to the cottage door at 7 in the evening, which was unusual. He normally texted ahead and knocked in his formal, precise way. 2 knocks, evenly spaced. Nora opened the door. He was standing on the step in his dark coat with his phone in his hand, and his expression was the one she had come to recognize as his version of significant news. Not excited, not alarmed, just more concentrated than usual, like a man who has decided what he thinks and is now choosing what to say. David Park called, he said. "May I come in?" She stepped back. He came in and stood by the wood stove, warming his hands, and she put the kettle on and waited. He completed his preliminary assessment, Walter said. He sent in photographs and his initial write-up to a colleague at Christie's in New York, a woman named Sue-Jean Lee who specializes in private collections of the period. And she flew out to see the pieces yesterday. Nora turned from the stove. She examined them in person for 4 hours, Walter said, with David present. She brought her own equipment. He paused. She called it the most significant discovery of privately held period jewelry she had encountered in her 22 years at Christie's. The kettle was not yet boiling, but Nora moved it off the burner anyway because she needed something to do with her hands. She authenticated the stones, Walter continued. All of them. The large diamond in the brooch is 4.3 carats, internally flawless, old European cut, consistent with late 19th century Antwerp sourcing. The Colombian emeralds are natural, untreated, which is extremely rare for pieces of this age. The Burmese rubies are natural as well, no heat treatment, which Sue-Jean said is almost never seen in privately held pieces. He was delivering this information with the precision of someone who had memorized it carefully because he knew it mattered and wanted to get it right. She said the metalwork alone would be significant, but the combination of documented provenance, exceptional stones, and the condition of the pieces means that this collection, presented as a whole at major auction, would attract international attention. How much? Nora said. Walter looked at her. She gave a pre-sale estimate, he said, for the full collection as a single lot, with complete notebook documentation and the letters as provenance support. He paused. $365 million. The wood stove ticked. Outside, the frost was setting in over the property, hardening everything. Nora sat down at the kitchen table. That's the low estimate, Walter said, very quietly. She said a bidding war between the right buyers was not impossible. There are private collectors who would find the story of the stones, their origin, the transport from Hamburg, the 50 years of work, as valuable as the pieces themselves. $365 million. For 9 pieces of jewelry made by a woman nobody had heard of, in a room with honest north light, for no audience but herself. She wants to proceed, Walter said. Sue Jean. She wants to propose a spring auction. Late April or early May, depending on the cataloging timeline. She said the story of the collection would be part of the presentation, your grandmother's notebooks, the family history, all of it. Nora looked at the table. Walter, she said. Yes. This is yours. He sat down across from her. He took his coat off and laid it over the back of the chair and folded his hands on the table in the way she had seen him fold them at the diner counter, careful and considered. It is mine, he said. Yes. What are you going to do with it? He was quiet for a moment. That is what I have been thinking about since David called at 4 o'clock this afternoon. He looked at the wood stove. My grandmother made those pieces. My mother protected them. Neither of them benefited materially from what they had in that box. And I am 73 years old with no children, an apartment I've lived in for 11 years without particularly caring about, and more money than I will ever use from the trust that has been managing itself while I avoided my own history. So you don't need the money, Nora said. No. He turned to look at her. I need to do something right with it. Something that honors what those 2 women were and what they never got to be. He paused. I have been thinking about what you told me on the drive to Portland. About your brother. About the children like him who age out of the system in June with nowhere to go. Nora was very still. I've been thinking about what you said when we first met, about knowing what it feels like to have something important left behind somewhere no one is looking. He held her gaze. I've been thinking about a woman named Clara who hid her greatest work in a wall for 40 years because the world hadn't made room for it. He paused. I don't want to do the same thing with this money. Hide it in a trust and leave it for someone else to figure out later. Walter, let me finish. He said it gently but firmly. I want to proceed with the auction. And I want, when it concludes, to establish a foundation. Something permanent, properly structured, with a real mandate. He looked at her directly. I want you to run it. The woodpecker had stopped somewhere in the trees outside. The frost was settled over everything. The cottage was warm and still, and slightly too small for the size of what was being said in it. I'm 26, she said. Clara Voss was 20 when she started setting those stones, he said. She had no credentials and no permission. She had skill and intention and the particular stubbornness of someone who knows what they're doing. He looked at her steadily. You found the coat. You found the key. You went to the house when I wouldn't. You have been managing this property and managing my gradual return to it with exactly the competence and care it required. He paused. I am not offering you charity. I am offering you a role that requires exactly the kind of person you are. Nora thought about what she had said to him in the diner, the morning she had put the key on the counter. I've spent most of my life in places other people gave up on. I know what it feels like to have something important left behind somewhere no one is looking. She had meant those words when she said them. She had not known, saying them, that they would come back to her like this. What kind of foundation? She said. Youth housing, he said. Transition housing specifically for young people aging out of foster care. What your brother is facing in June, what you faced at 17. Places that are real homes, not shelters. With real support, education access, stability. He paused. We could start with this property. The main house has 8 bedrooms and 3 guest cabins. It has been empty for 11 years. It could be something. Nora looked at the wall of the cottage. The braided rug. The hook by the door where the coat was hanging. She thought about the room above the laundromat. The stuck window. The left burner. She thought about a series of rooms in a series of cities, each one survivable, none of them home. She thought about Marcus on the Sunday phone call, the crack in his voice when he understood what she was telling him. She thought about Clara Voss in the Northlight room setting a diamond into a bird's breast and deciding it was right. Yes, she said. For the second time in a month, she said that word to this man across a table and meant it completely. Yes. Walter unfolded his hands. Something in his face released, not visibly, but in the way that faces release when they have been holding something and have been given permission to put it down. Good, he said. Then we have work to do. January was when things became real in the way that things only become real when other people start to know about them. David Park had shared the preliminary findings with Christie's under a confidentiality agreement. But confidentiality in the art and auction world is a relative concept. And within 3 weeks of Soo-Jin Lee's visit, two things happened nearly simultaneously. A journalist at a Portland arts publication who had contacts at Christie's made a call to Walter asking if he was aware of a significant jewelry discovery connected to a historic estate east of Halver. And a woman named Patricia Strand, who identified herself as representing a private collector based in Geneva, contacted Robert Chen's office with an offer to acquire the collection privately before any auction. Walter handled both with the same measured calm he applied to everything. He declined the private sale through Robert. He agreed to speak briefly with the journalist, on the record, with the understanding that the story would focus on Clara Voss and her work rather than on the monetary figures, which he refused to confirm or deny at this stage. The article came out in the 3rd week of January. It was titled The Hidden Jeweler of Halvern, and it was, by the standards of an arts publication with a regional readership, a significant piece. The journalist had done her research, had located 2 photographs of Clara Voss in the Halvern Historical Society archives that Agnes produced with considerable pride, and had interviewed David Park extensively about what the pieces represented in the context of early 20th century American craft. Nora read the article 3 times at the kitchen table in the cottage. Clara was in it, not as a footnote, not as a background figure to the story of the money, but as the center of it. The article traced her journey from Hamburg, her father's craft, her marriage to Edmund, her decades of work in the North Light Room. It reproduced one of the margin sketches from the notebooks, the quick, sure pencil drawing of the bird pin. It quoted David Park saying that the technical accomplishment of the collection placed Clara Voss in the category of the foremost craftspeople of her era, known or unknown. Known or unknown. Nora folded the article carefully and put it in the dollar store notebook, between 2 pages of her own observations about frost patterns and woodpeckers. Agnes called her that same afternoon. The Historical Society had been inundated, she said, with the specific excitement of a small institution that has unexpectedly become relevant. 3 universities had made inquiries about the notebooks. A documentary filmmaker in Seattle had sent an email. The Oregon Historical Society wanted to discuss a potential partnership with whatever foundation was being established. You should have heard me tell them about the key, Agnes said, with transparent satisfaction. The lever mechanism, the custom cut. I told them it was only a matter of finding the right lock. You told me that, Nora said. I know, Agnes said. I'm allowed to be pleased about being right. February brought Marcus for a weekend visit. He arrived on a Friday evening on the bus from Salem, which stopped in Halvern at 6:15, and Nora drove Walter's car to pick him up because her own was not yet a thing she had. He was taller than she remembered from the last time she had seen him in person, which was 8 months ago at a mandatory court check-in. And he had the particular self-consciousness of a 17-year-old who knows he is being looked at by someone who loves him and is trying to absorb the change. She hugged him in the bus stop parking lot for a long time, and he let her, which meant he had missed her more than he was going to say. You're taller, she said. You say that every time. Because it keeps being true. She drove him out the county road and through the gate and up the driveway in the dark, the headlights sweeping across the winter-dead grass. And when the main house came into the lights, he said nothing for a moment, just looked. Nora, he said. I know. I know. She took him to the cottage first, showed him the 2 bedrooms, watched him stand in the doorway of the second one. The smaller east-facing room she had kept empty and uncluttered, waiting. He stood there looking at it the way she had stood looking at the library the first day she came to the house, with a kind of careful attention that meant he was trying to make it real. This would be mine, he said. Yours, she said. In June, if you want it. He turned around, and his face was doing several things at once, the way faces do when they have been given something they have wanted for a long time without entirely believing they would get it. He was trying to be composed about it, and not quite managing, which was the right response. Composure was for things that didn't matter. She showed him the main house the next morning, the full tour, the library and the workroom and the 12 notebooks still in their row on the shelf, and the iron compartment in the fireplace wall standing open because Walter had decided, after reading all 12 notebooks, that there was no reason to close it again. It was not a lock anymore. It was a record of what had been kept there, which was different. Walter came that afternoon and joined them for tea in the cottage kitchen, and Nora watched her brother across the table from a 73-year-old man and felt something settle in her chest that had not been settled in a long time. Something about the specific shape of this. Two people she loved in the same warm room. The wood stove going, the winter light coming in the east window. Walter asked Marcus about engineering. Marcus, who was usually cautious with new adults until he had established what they wanted, answered directly, because Walter asked the way someone asks who is actually interested in the answer, and Marcus was good enough at reading people to know the difference. They talked for an hour. Walter about the property, what it had been, what it might become. Marcus about his plans, cautious still but real, naming specific things, structural engineering, sustainable building, the particular appeal of making things that lasted. When Walter left at 4, Marcus helped Nora wash the cups and then stood at the east window looking out at the property in the late afternoon light. "He's going to be okay," Marcus said. "Who?" "Him." Marcus gestured toward the driveway where Walter's car had gone. "He seems like someone who was lost for a long time and is figuring out where he is." Nora looked at her brother. 17 years old and already reading people with the accuracy of someone who has had to do it to survive. "Yeah," she said. "He is." Marcus turned from the window. "Are you okay?" "Yes." "Really?" She thought about the honest answer. "I'm more okay than I've been since before Mom got sick," she said. "Which is a long time." He nodded, taking that in. "I kept the second bedroom empty," she said. "I didn't put anything in it. I didn't want to use it for something else." He looked at her. "I wanted it to already be yours when you saw it," she said. Marcus Callahan, 17 years old, for foster placements, engineering dreams and Sunday phone calls, and a composure he wore like armor over the softer thing underneath, looked at his sister and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "I'm coming in June." "I know," she said. "I just want to say it out loud. Say it as many times as you want." "I'm coming in June," he said again, and this time he was smiling. March was the auction preparation. Sujin Lee flew out from New York and spent a week at the property, working with Walter and David Park and 2 specialists she brought with her, photographing each piece under controlled lighting, documenting the notebook sketches, preparing the provenance record that would accompany the catalog. She was efficient and precise and had the particular quality of someone who understood the difference between what something was worth and what it meant, and who held both things with equal seriousness. She came to the cottage on a Wednesday evening at Nora's invitation because Nora had a question she had been holding for 2 months. They sat at the kitchen table with tea, and Nora asked it directly. "The bird pin," she said. "When it sells, who buys something like that?" Sujin considered the question with the respect it deserved. "The right buyer for a piece like that is someone who understands what they're acquiring," she said. "Not just the monetary value. The story." She wrapped her hands around her mug. "There are collectors who buy jewelry the way people buy art, for what it represents. Who it came from, what it cost the maker." She paused. "The bird pin will sell to someone who understands that the diamond in its breast is not an ornament. It's a decision. It's Clara Voss deciding this was where that stone belonged." Nora thought about that for a long time after Sujin left. She thought about it while she was learning, in those same weeks, to manage the practical machinery of what was being built. The foundation's legal structure being established through Robert Chun, whom Walter had asked to serve as the foundation's legal counsel. The property assessment, which had revealed that the main house needed a new roof on the east wing, a complete heating overhaul, and significant work on the plumbing, all of it manageable, none of it cheap, all of it funded in advance from the family trust while the auction proceeds were pending. The contractors started in the second week of March. The house, which had been quiet for 11 years, was loud with work and people and purpose, and something in its quality of attention changed, the way a face changes when it is being spoken to instead of waited past. Nora managed the contractors. She was good at it, better than she had expected, though she should have expected it because she had been managing difficult situations in difficult buildings since she was 15 years old. She knew how to be specific about what she needed and firm about timelines and practical about problems, and the contractors responded to this the way most people respond to someone who is clear and fair and does not waste their time. Walter noticed. He said so one evening when she had just finished resolving a dispute between the plumber and the heating contractor about access to a particular wall cavity, which she had done by examining both arguments and ruling on the merits without consulting anyone. "You were born to run something," he said. "I was born to survive things," she said. "Running something turns out to use a lot of the same skills." He smiled. Not the ghost of a smile she had seen at the diner in October. A real one. The auction was set for the 28th of April. Christie's, New York. An evening sale, which was where they put the pieces they expected to perform. The catalog had been released 3 weeks prior and had generated the kind of attention that Sue Jean had predicted. Coverage in arts publications, in the major newspapers, a long piece in a financial magazine about the discovery of privately held collections in family estates. The story of Clara Voss, the immigrant jeweler, the stones carried from Hamburg in a tool case, the 50 years of work in a Northlight room that nobody saw, had captured something that pure monetary news would not have captured on its own. People understood the story. That was the thing that struck Nora most, reading the coverage. People understood what it meant to make something extraordinary in a room by yourself for an audience of 1 and 2. Have it discovered 80 years later and recognized for exactly what it was. Walter asked if she wanted to go to New York for the sale. She thought about it for 2 days. Then she said no. Not because she was uninterested. Because she understood, thinking it through, that the auction was not her event. The collection was Clara's. The decision to sell was Walter's. The vindication was for a woman who had been dead for 80 years and who had done her work without needing the world's approval, which was the whole point. Going to New York to watch the numbers come in felt like putting herself at the center of something that was not about her. She stayed at the property. Walter went. He called her from his hotel room the night before and said he was calm, which was true. She could hear it. He said he was going to sit in the room and think about his grandmother. The sale was streamed online. Nora watched it on her laptop at the cottage kitchen table on the evening of April 28th, the wood stove going, the east window showing the last of the daylight over the tree line. She had a mug of tea. The dollar store notebook was open beside her, not because she planned to write anything, but because she had brought it to the table out of habit. The collection came up as the 6th lot of the evening. Sue Jean presented it herself, which Nora had not known she was going to do. She stood at the front of the Christie's sale room in New York and spoke for 4 minutes about Clara Voss, about the notebooks, about the stones that had crossed an ocean in a craftsman's tool case in 1887, about the bird pin and the diamond in its breast, and what it meant that a woman had set that stone in that place for no one but herself. Nora watched the screen. The sale room was full. The bidding opened at $60 million. It went quickly, and then it went slowly, and then it went quickly again. The kind of auction rhythm that meant multiple serious bidders, the kind that Sue Jean had said was not impossible, and that was now, apparently, happening. Nora watched the numbers on the screen and thought about 9 pieces of jewelry laid in midnight blue velvet in the honest light of a November afternoon in a cold library. The hammer fell at $368 million. Above the low estimate by $3 million. Exactly what it was worth to exactly the right buyer, which was, she understood in the moment of it, the right outcome. Clara had not made those pieces to achieve a record. She had made them to be what they were. $368 million for 9 pieces of jewelry that had spent 80 years in a stone wall. Nora sat at her kitchen table in the cottage on the Whitmore estate and watched the number on her laptop screen and felt something that was not triumph and not relief and not the particular day's quality she had expected, but something quieter and more solid than all of those. She felt it settle, the way the right key settles in a lock. She closed the laptop. She picked up the dollar store notebook and wrote one line. April 28th. The bird flew. She put the notebook down. She put on the coat, which was hanging on its hook by the door, and she went out onto the east porch and stood in the cold spring night air with her hands in the pockets and the key in the right one, and she looked out at the property, the pond catching what moonlight there was, the trees solid and dark along the far edge. Her phone buzzed. Walter, from New York. She would have been pleased. Nora typed back. I think she already was. She stood on the porch for a while longer. The cold was not the same cold as November. There was something different in it, something that was not quite warmth, but was moving in that direction, the slow, reliable turning of the year toward whatever came next. She went back inside and put the kettle on. The foundation was named for Clara. Not the Clara Whitmore Foundation, not the Whitmore Aldric Foundation. Walter was firm about this. It was the Clara Voss Foundation, her name as she had been born with it, as she had signed the back of every piece she made, the double V mark that Agnes at the Historical Society had identified immediately when she saw it in the notebook photographs. The naming was announced in the second week of May, along with the Foundation's mandate: transition housing and comprehensive support for young people aging out of foster care, with particular attention to those who had experienced multiple placements and had no stable family connection. The announcement generated attention that was different in quality from the auction coverage. The auction had interested people who followed the art and luxury market. The foundation announcement interested people who had been those teenagers, who had aged out of foster care in June with a trash bag of belongings and nowhere to go, who had been Marcus or Nora, or one of the several 100,000 young people who experienced that specific and preventable crisis every year in the United States. Letters came. Nora read every one of them. She kept them in a folder on the desk she had set up in the smaller bedroom of the cottage, next to her laptop and the dollar store notebook and the growing stack of notebooks that had replaced it as the ones from the dollar store ran out. One letter was from a woman in Seattle who had aged out of the system at 18 in 1987 and had spent 2 years homeless before finding her footing, who was now a social worker and who wrote that she had spent 30 years waiting for someone to do exactly this in exactly this way. One letter was from a 17-year-old boy in Portland named Jamie who wrote in careful, slightly formal language that he had heard about the foundation and wanted to know if it was real. Nora wrote back to Jamie directly. "It's real," she wrote. "We open our first residential program in September. If you need a place to land, contact us. We'll make sure there's room." Marcus graduated in May. The ceremony was in a gymnasium in Salem, folding chairs in rows, paper programs, a principal who gave a speech about doors opening. Nora sat in the third row with Walter on one side of her and Danny, who had driven up from Halvern, on the other. When Marcus crossed the stage to receive his diploma, he was composed, the way he was always composed in front of people who didn't know him. But when he found Nora's eyes in the crowd, the composure shifted for just a second, the way it had on the phone in November when she told him about the cottage, and she thought, "There it is. There is the person underneath all that surviving." She clapped until her hands hurt. Afterward, in the parking lot, he stood with his diploma and his cap slightly crooked and said, "I'm coming home in 3 weeks." "I know," she said. "I already made your bed." He looked at her. "I did it last week," she said. "I put the good sheets on. And I got a reading lamp for the nightstand because I know you read late." He made a sound that was not quite a laugh and pulled her into a hug that was the hug of someone who had learned not to need things and was still learning that it was permitted to need them anyway. Walter shook his hand when they separated, formal and warm in the way that was specifically his. He said, "The estate is expecting you." Marcus looked at him. Then he said, with the directness that Nora recognized as something they shared, a family trait earned rather than inherited, "I want to help. With the foundation. Whatever I can do." "We know," Walter said. "We're counting on it." June was the beginning. The east wing roof was finished in the last week of May. The heating system was operational. The 8 bedrooms of the main house had been renovated at Nora's direction to feel like actual rooms in an actual home, which meant individual character rather than institutional uniformity, different colors, different furniture arrangements, real art on the walls sourced from an artist collective in Portland that Walter had found through the arts publication that had run the story about Clara. The 3 guest cabins had been updated with the same principle. Each one a real place to live, not a shelter bed with a number, not a temporary arrangement with rules posted on the inside of the door. A home, the kind that believed in the person inhabiting it. The caretaker's cottage remained Nora's and Marcus's. He arrived on the 15th of June, dropped at the county road gate with 2 bags and a backpack and a rolled poster of a suspension bridge he had been keeping folded in a drawer for 3 years. Nora was at the gate when he arrived. He stood in the road with his bags and looked at the gate, and then at her, and then at the property beyond the open gate, the driveway going back through the trees toward the house and the cottage and the pond. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she agreed. She picked up one of his bags, and they walked in through the gate together. The suspension bridge poster went up on the wall of his room that same afternoon. Nora watched him hang it and thought about all the drawings she had never pinned to walls because she had never been anywhere long enough to put a nail in. She did not say this. She just watched him hang it and felt the particular satisfaction of things being in the right place. The first residential cohort arrived in September. 6 young people, aged 17 to 21, all referred through youth services and foster care networks that had been building relationships with the foundation through the summer. Nora had been involved in every intake conversation, not to control it, but to make sure it was real, the way she had been involved in everything that mattered. Jamie, The boy from Portland who had written the careful, formal letter in May was one of them. He arrived on the first day of September with a backpack and the particular defensive courtesy of someone who had learned to be polite as a survival strategy and who was not yet sure it was safe to be anything else. Nora showed him to his room, which was on the second floor of the main house with a window that looked toward the pond. He stood in it for a moment, looking at the window. "This is mine," he said. "Yours," she said. "For as long as you need it." He turned around. He was 18 years old, and he had the face of someone who had been through more than anyone his age should have been through, and who was still, despite everything, intact, the essential self still there behind the wariness, still choosing to walk through doors instead of away from them. "There are no rules posted anywhere," he said. "There are expectations," she said. "Not rules. Expectations are different." "How?" "Rules are about control," she said. "Expectations are about believing you can meet them." She looked at him directly. "We expect you to be here, to show up, to ask for help when you need it instead of handling everything alone." She paused. "Everything else we figure out together." He looked at the window, at the pond visible in the September light, at the trees along the far edge of the property, standing solid and permanent the way that things stand when they have been there for a long time and intend to stay. "Okay," he said. She left him to settle. In the hallway, she passed Marcus coming up the stairs with a load of towels for the linen closet, 18 years old and 3 months into the engineering program at the community college in Halvern, working part-time for the foundation in the hours between classes, learning everything about the property with the same systematic attention she applied to it. "He okay?" Marcus asked, gesturing toward the room. "He will be," she said. Marcus nodded and went on up the stairs. On a Thursday morning in late September, the other residents had settled into the beginning of their routines, classes and sessions, and the early quiet rhythms of people learning to trust a place. And Nora was in the library reviewing a proposal from a youth advocacy organization in Eugene about a potential partnership when she heard a car on the driveway. Walter came in through the front door with 2 cups of coffee from the Halvern bakery that he had taken to bringing when he drove out in the mornings, and set one on the corner of the table she had claimed as her desk. He sat in the chair across from her, and they worked in companionable silence for a while, the library warm and the notebooks on the shelves, and the iron compartment in the fireplace wall standing open the way it had stood since October of the previous year. After about an hour, Walter set down his pen. "I read the last of Clara's notebooks last week," he said. She looked up. "The final entry," he said. "November 1939. She was 70 years old." He looked at his coffee. "She writes about a piece she is finishing, a commission, a brooch for a woman in Portland she doesn't name. And at the end she writes something." He paused, recalling it. She writes, "I have been working for 50 years and I understand now that the work was never for anyone but myself. This is not selfishness. It is the opposite. The work is the truest thing I can offer the world. The work is myself, fully present, fully honest, holding nothing back. When I am gone, the work will still be true. That is enough. That is more than enough." He set down the coffee. "More than enough," he said quietly, to himself as much as to her. Nora thought about a woman in a Northlight room in 1939, 70 years old, setting a stone into its place and deciding it was right. She thought about 12 notebooks of a life lived honestly and without audience. She thought about 9 pieces of jewelry in a midnight blue box in a stone wall, waiting 80 years for someone to open the door. She was right, Nora said. Walter looked at her. "The work is what lasts," she said. "Clara's pieces lasted. Your mother's letters lasted. The notebooks lasted." She looked toward the window where the September morning light was coming in at the particular angle it came in at this time of year, honest and unhurried. "Whatever we're building here, the work of it is what will last. Not the sale price. Not the headlines." She paused. "The rooms. The people in them." Walter nodded slowly. "I think my grandmother would have approved of you," he said. "You've said that before. I'll keep saying it until you believe it." She almost smiled. "She'd have given me the bird pin," she said. "You said so." She would have. He reached into his coat pocket and set something on the table between them. It was the bird pin. It sat on the library table in the autumn light, the gold body, the textured wings, the diamond in the breast catching the window, and sending a small clear flare across the surface between them. She stared at it. "Sujin called me in June," Walter said. The buyer was a private collector in Tokyo, a woman named Haruko Tanaka, who collects pieces with stories. Sujin told her about the foundation. She contacted me. He paused. She bought the pin specifically because of what it meant, because of the woman who made it and the reason she made it. And she asked me to give it to whoever was carrying the story forward. Nora looked at the pin on the table. She said, "Tell whoever is doing the work that the bird should be worn," Walter said. Not kept in a box. The foundation was 3 months old. 6 residents, more coming in October, a waiting list that was already telling her the need was larger than a single property in rural Oregon, that this was the beginning of something rather than the completion of it. Marcus was upstairs in the main house right now, running a math session for 2 of the residents who were working toward their GEDs, because he had suggested it himself, and because he was good at it, and because nobody had to ask him twice to do something useful. Jamie was in his room with the window facing the pond, reading a book she had found for him in the library, because he had mentioned, carefully, in the way he mentioned most things, that he had always liked to read. A young woman named Selena was crossing the grounds with her hands in her pockets, moving through the property with the beginning of belonging, the wariness still there, but no longer the whole thing. Nora reached out and picked up the bird pin. It was light in her hand, lighter than the key, lighter than 8 months of wondering what the key opened, lighter than 3 years of Sunday phone calls and P.O. boxes and the specific, familiar weight of carrying things alone. She looked at it for a long time. Then she pinned it to the lapel of the navy coat. It sat there exactly right, the way the right thing sits when it has found where it belongs. The diamond in the bird's breast caught the afternoon light through the library windows and held it, clear and steady, the way stones hold light when they have been set by someone who understood exactly what they were doing. Walter looked at it, then at her. "Good," he said. Simply, the way he said things when he meant them entirely. She looked down at it one more time. A woman named Clara Voss had made that pin in a North Light room in 1909. She had set a diamond in its breast and decided it was right. She had sealed it in a box in a wall and left a key in a coat pocket and let the years pass, trusting that what was true would remain true for as long as it needed to. And now Nora Callahan, 26 years old, was wearing it in the library of the house where Clara had made it, managing a foundation named for her, surrounded by young people who had been where Nora had been and who were, slowly and carefully and at their own pace, finding out what it felt like to have a door open instead of close. She stood up because there was work to do. There was always work to do, and she had learned, over the past year, that this was not the burden she had once experienced it as. Work was not what you did until something better came along. Work was the thing itself, the making of it, the tending of it, the decision, every day, to show up to it honestly and hold nothing back. She went to do it. The coat on her shoulders, the key in its pocket, the bird on her lapel, wearing the things that had found her and carrying them forward the way Clara had always intended them to be carried. Not in a box, not in a wall, not locked away in the dark waiting for someone brave enough to turn the key. In the world, where they could be seen and worn and used for exactly the purpose they had always been made for. The bird flew. 2 years after the bird flew, the Clara Voss Foundation had 17 residents across 2 properties. The Whitmore estate remained the anchor, the original 8 bedrooms in the main house running at capacity through the full year, the 3 guest cabins housing young people who had reached a stage where they needed proximity to the community without being inside the main building's closer rhythms. The second property was a converted farmhouse 40 minutes south of Halvern, purchased in the spring of the second year with a portion of the foundation's endowment, 8 more beds, a shared kitchen large enough to actually cook in, a workshop space in the old barn that had no designated purpose yet, and that Nora had left deliberately undesignated because she had learned, in 2 years of running this, that the best thing a room could be was available. She drove between the 2 properties twice a week, Tuesday and Friday. In the second-hand Subaru she had bought the previous March with the first salary she had ever paid herself from the foundation's operating budget, which had required a specific conversation with Robertson about the difference between running something sustainably and running it on pure will and leftover stubbornness. Robert had made the argument clearly, and she had accepted it, which was one of the things she had learned in 2 years, that accepting reasonable help was not the same thing as needing to be rescued. That distinction had taken her longer to arrive at than she would admit to most people. Jamie was 20 now. He had stayed at the Whitmore estate for 14 months, which was longer than the average and shorter than some, and had left in the November of his second year to move into an apartment in Portland with two other young men he had met through a job training program that the foundation had connected him with. He worked at an architecture firm, entry-level, filing and organizing, and occasionally, when someone needed an extra pair of hands and didn't mind that the hands belonged to a 20-year-old with no degree, sitting in on client meetings and absorbing everything he could. He called Nora on the second Sunday of every month. Not because she asked him to, because he had decided to. The calls were not long. He was not a person who talked at length, which she had understood from the first careful letter he had written to her. The formal language that was armor the same way composure was armor, useful until you didn't need it anymore, and then still there from habit. But he always told her something real. A problem at work he had figured out. A book he had read. Once, in the spring of his first year in Portland, a girl he had met at a community college open house who liked the same obscure science fiction novels he did. She listened to all of it with the same attention she had given everything about him since the day he arrived with his backpack and his defensive courtesy and stood at the window looking at the pond. On the most recent call, 2 weeks ago, he had said, "I want to come back sometime. Not to stay, just to come back." She had told him, "The door is always open." She had meant it in the specific way, the literal way, the way that was different from the vague, open-door language people used when they meant something polite and noncommittal. She had meant, "You are part of this place, and this place is part of you, and that does not expire." He had been quiet for a moment, and then said, "Okay." And she had known, the way she had learned to know things about him over 2 years, that the okay contained more than its single syllable. Marcus turned 20 in March. He was in his second year of the engineering program at Halvern Community College, pulling grades that his advisor had described. In a written assessment Nora had not been supposed to see, but had because Marcus had left it on the kitchen table, as genuinely exceptional, which was the kind of word that college advisors deployed carefully, and that meant, when deployed, exactly what it said. He still worked part-time for the foundation, managing the property maintenance schedule and, increasingly, taking on the coordination of the physical improvements that Nora generated ideas for faster than she could implement them. He had a gift for translating her conceptual directions into practical sequences of tasks, which was, she suspected, the engineering brain operating in its natural habitat. He had also, in the past 6 months, started spending 2 evenings a week at the Halvern Youth Center running a drop-in math session for teenagers who needed help and wouldn't ask for it in a formal setting, but would accept it from a 20-year-old in a flannel shirt who made bad jokes and never made them feel stupid for not knowing something. Nora found out about the sessions not from Marcus, but from the youth center director, who called her to say her brother had quietly become one of their most reliable volunteers and to ask whether the foundation would consider a formal partnership. She had gone home that evening and stood in the cottage kitchen and thought about a 17-year-old boy who had packed his few things into 2 bags and walked through a gate and hung a poster of a suspension bridge on his wall and called it home. Who had learned, in the 2 years since, that having a home was not the end of a story but the condition that made the next part of it possible. She had not told him she knew about the sessions. She would, eventually. For now she let him have the private satisfaction of doing something good without an audience. She understood the value of that, from personal experience. Selena was the one Nora thought about most on the days when the work was hard. She had arrived in September of the first year. The young woman Nora had watched crossing the grounds in the early days with her hands in her pockets and the wariness still the dominant thing. She had been 19, 2 years out of a placement that had ended badly in ways she disclosed gradually and at her own pace, which was the right pace and the only pace Nora ever accepted. She had stayed for a full year. In that year she had earned her GED, started a certificate program in graphic design through an online institution that the foundation covered, and had, in the last 3 months of her stay, begun mentoring 2 of the newer residents, not formally, not with a title, just by being present and available and honest in the specific way that only someone who has been exactly where you are can be honest with you. When she left, she moved to Eugene, where the graphic design program had a physical campus she could attend part-time while working. She had a portfolio already, small, but real. Logos she had designed for 2 local businesses who had paid her actual money. A series of illustrations she had made for a children's nonprofit that had found her through the foundation's network. She sent Nora her work sometimes, not asking for anything, just sending it. Look what I made. The same impulse Clara Voss had presumably never been able to act on. The simple human need to show someone what you had done and have them see it. Nora always wrote back within a day. Always specific, always honest, never performative. She had learned that the worst thing you could do for someone who was building something fragile and real was to respond with vague encouragement. Specificity was respect. Telling Selena exactly what worked about a piece and exactly what she might reconsider was the most useful thing Nora could offer, and she had figured out, slowly, that being useful was its own form of love. Walter turned 75 in October. The Foundation threw him a small dinner in the Whitmore Estate's dining room. The first formal dinner held in that room since long before Nora had found the coat on the sidewalk. The long table uncovered and set, the stone fireplace going, the iron compartment in the wall still open because none of them had ever decided to close it. There were 12 people at the table. Robert Chun, David Park, who had driven up from Portland, Agnes from the Historical Society, who had accepted the invitation with the promptness of someone who had been waiting to be asked, Sujin Lee, who happened to be in Portland for an unrelated appraisal and had rearranged her schedule when Nora called, Danny, several of the Foundation staff, Marcus, Nora, and 4 current and former residents, including Jamie, who had driven down from Portland in a car he had borrowed from his roommate, and who had arrived early and spent 30 minutes in the library before dinner, standing in front of the fireplace looking at the open compartment in the wall the way Nora had stood in front of it 2 years ago, with a quality of attention that told her he understood what he was looking at, what was kept there, and what the keeping had cost, and what the opening had made possible. Walter gave a short speech after dinner. He was not a man who gave speeches, but he was a man who, when he had something to say, said it precisely and without waste, and what he said that evening was this. He had spent 11 years avoiding the thing that would give his life its final meaning. He had done this out of grief and guilt, and the particular cowardice of people who love too much and cannot bear to be reminded of what they have lost. He said, I am not recommending this. I am saying it because I want the young people in this room to understand that the time you spend avoiding the thing is time the thing spends waiting, and things that matter do not stop mattering because you are not ready for them. He looked at Nora when he said the last part. She looked back at him and said nothing, which was the right response and which he understood as such. After dinner, she stood on the back porch of the Whitmore house in the October cold, the bird pin on her lapel and the key in her coat pocket, looking out at the property in the dark. The pond was invisible from here at this hour, but she knew where it was, knew the distance to it by feel, knew the path through the dead grass, and the way the ground changed just before the water's edge. Behind her, through the dining room windows, she could hear the sounds of the dinner winding down, voices and laughter and the particular warmth of people who have shared something real and are not yet ready to stop. Marcus came out and stood beside her. They stood together for a while without talking, which was something they had gotten good at in 2 years of sharing a cottage and a kitchen and a life that was finally, unmistakably, theirs. Then Marcus said, I've been thinking about the second property. The farmhouse. What about it? The workshop in the barn. You said you left it undesignated. I did. I want to build something in it, he said. Not a room. An actual structure. Small, a demonstration project, sustainable materials, passive heating. Something I can learn from, and that could be useful afterward. He paused. I talked to my advisor. He said it could count toward my practicum hours. Nora turned to look at him. He was 20 years old with the suspension bridge poster on his wall, and 2 years of engineering coursework in him, and the particular quality of someone who had decided what they wanted to build and was asking not for permission, but for the acknowledgement that came before beginning. Build it, she said. He nodded once. They went back inside together. The coat was warm and the key was in its pocket, and the bird on her lapel caught the light from the dining room windows as she walked through the door, clear and steady, the way it always had, the way it always would, as long as someone was wearing it into rooms where things were happening and work was being done and young people were learning, slowly and at their own pace, what it felt like to be somewhere that believed in them. That was enough. That was more than enough. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.